Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the AI and Future of Law podcast. I'm your co host, Jen Leonard, founder of Creative Lawyers, joined as always by the fantastic Bridget McCormack, president and CEO of the American Arbitration Association. On this podcast, we explore all the fascinating and fast moving dynamics related to artificial intelligence and what it means for our profession, including our court system. And we are delighted today to be joined by a leader in one of the country's largest and busiest systems. And so I will turn it over to Bridget to introduce today's guests. Bridget.
I am really excited about today's conversation because my friend and one of my favorite people in the whole world is our guest. David Slayton is the CEO for the Superior Court of LA County, the largest court system in the country. And I met David when he was the state court administrator for the state of Texas. And especially through the pandemic, he and I co-led a number of technology and innovation efforts. David has 26 years of experience in court administration at every level and is viewed by everybody who's ever worked for a court as like the thought leader and innovator in court administration, court operations, and innovation and access to justice. He's also incredibly smart, fun to talk to, and a absolutely lovely person. David, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Bridget. Thanks, Jenna. I'm glad my mom found your email so she could send you those comments. So that's nice.
We start our podcast every week with what we call our AI aha moments, and these are just ways in which we are or our guests, when we have guests, are using generative AI either in our work lives or in our out of work lives. Just fun things we're doing with it, or things we're finding, use cases we're finding for it that are kind of fun to share. And so we like to have our guests share an AI aha, and so I'll start with that. David, what are you doing with this technology lately in your life?
Yeah, I think as I think about this, two things come to mind. And the first is I recently took a trip to Scotland, and it was a 2 week trip. My family was going with me, and I bought the travel guide, and I was thinking, why am I doing all this work? And so I literally asked ChatGPT to help me plan my vacation. I did some of it myself, and then I uploaded the document in ChatGPT and said, "Is this reasonable to do?" Because I generally overplan, and my family's like, "Seriously?" And so ChatGPT gave me good tips, and so I did that. And then the other thing I'll just say professionally is we launched a new website at the court, lacourt.ca.gov on July the 1st. And we have on it a generative AI tool right on the home screen to help people. It's called Court Help. And I'm now using that to find anything on our website because rather than clicking and finding it, it's just so much faster to say, hey, take me to the strategic plan. And it takes me right to it. So those are two things that I'm using it for right now.
That's great. I hadn't heard that you all launched that. I've been following, the different courts that are figuring out ways to use it, especially to help, people who have to interact with courts and especially people who have to interact with courts without lawyers. Although as a lawyer, I often find court websites to be like, really, really hard to navigate. So that's a pretty cool offering. I'm sure people appreciate it. So let me start there though. Tell everybody a little bit more about the LA court system. I remember when you took the job and told me just how complex it was. And I don't know if anybody understands that. So can you just describe a little bit about like the volume of cases the court sees, the people you serve, how many of those are navigating your courtrooms without lawyers, the number of judges, sort of like paint the picture of what the LA County court system is so we understand what you're up to day to day.
Yeah. So as you point out, it's the largest court system in the country. We have 582 judges and commissioners, judicial officers, as we'd call them, who are at the court, spread across over 4,700 square miles. They sit in 36 courthouses across the county, and we have about 5,000 employees who work for the court. $1.1 billion budget, and I did say B with a billion, billion with a B. And we obviously serve a lot of people. There are about 1.3 million cases filed per year. in the court across our litigation types. We handle everything from small claims and traffic tickets to the most complex civil litigation and even death penalty cases and everything in between. So it's a consolidated trial court. We handle everything, and we have a tremendous number of self-represented litigants, people representing themselves or at least attempting to represent themselves. In our family context, I think it's depending on the year, somewhere between 70 and 80% of the people navigating the family system either start off or end off the case representing themselves. Usually grows over the life of a case. In the civil context, more lawyers in there. But just to give you an example, we recently did some work with Stanford on our eviction, what we call unlawful detainer cases. And only 14% of defendants in the last year in our eviction cases were represented by a lawyer. That's compared to, I think, 94% of landlords represented by a lawyer, only 14% of tenants represented by a lawyer. So, and that gap continues to grow. We looked back over several years and we see that. So, obviously lots of people trying to do this by themselves, which I think is really relevant to the topic we're going to be talking about today.
So, David, let's dive right into the topic. The complexity of what you've just described is staggering in its scope, and then the number of people trying to navigate the system is appalling, and really ripe for new solutions. And courts are often slow moving and find it difficult to adapt to new technologies, but your plan in LA for 2025 to 2028 really explicitly highlights AI and generative AI as being important to the strategy of the courts. Could you tell us about the vision of the plan and why it's so important to you and the leadership of the courts and those you work with to harness the power of AI right now?
Yeah, one of the things that's sort of stuck with me for, I guess, now 11 years. And Chief Justice McCormack has heard me say this before. I keep thinking I'm going to get in trouble, get a call from Chief Justice John Roberts when I say this publicly, but I'll just keep saying it until he gives me a call. But in 2014, in his end of the year address that the Chief Justice always does, Chief Justice Roberts said, "The courts will often choose to be late to the harvest of ingenuity." And he was sort of talking about the slow pace that the Supreme Court had taken with regard to getting to electronic filing. And, I think he's right on that. At least we're oftentimes slow to the harvest of ingenuity, but the word "choose" in there sort of offends me. And I think it's a challenge to all of us to really think about why would we choose to be late to the harvest of ingenuity. But sometimes it's true. So one of the things that really, when we think about the vision for the LA Superior Court, we started talking. This was about a 6 or 8 month process with our judicial officers, very engaged. We had 21 judges from across our court, different disciplines, different lengths of time with the court, and we started looking at sort of the basics. What's our vision? What's our mission? Um, we changed our mission statement, and I won't read you the whole thing, but everyone can look it up. But one of the things that we really talked about was in our old mission statement, we had the word efficient, that we would be efficient. And there was a very intentional shift. That word does not exist in our mission statement anymore. It's now that we will be effective. And I think that's something that's really important to me and important to our court of, let's not just do things to do it fast. Let's do it well. And then, when we looked at our vision statement, I'll read you our whole vision statement, which is our court will be accessible to all, trusted by all, and just for all. And it's a pretty strong statement that we want to be accessible by all. And I just gave you earlier some of the real barriers to access to big county. Traffic's an issue, technology is an issue for some people, language barriers. We could go on and on, all the barriers. And so trying to think of ways to make it truly accessible for all. And then, trusted by all. I know we're going to talk today, I think, a little bit about how we make sure people trust us, but that's another big one. How do we make sure the system is trusted? And if they can't access it, they can't trust us either. So that's really important. And then the last piece, just for all. We want to be doing justice the best we can, and thinking about new and innovative ways to do that and sort of meet the needs our litigants is important. So, we really sort of go through that and think about what does that look like? Well, we want to be people focused. We want to really sort of make sure that the first thing we think about when we are doing things at the court, new technology, new innovation, new processes, really sort of start from the focus of the people, primarily the court users, but also our internal court staff and judicial officers. But really, the first one is the folks outside. We want to be transformative through innovation. We want to use data to inform our decisions, and ultimately, all of that led us to this idea of just really sort of focusing on enhancing accessibility and transforming the user experience. And sort of thinking innovatively and forward, looking into how we might be able to do that. I think, as you look back over the couple of centuries, almost 250 years now that we've been doing this in this country, I think many times people have said Thomas Jefferson could walk in and practice law today. I don't know that that's something we should be proud of. Especially now that most people don't have a Thomas Jefferson standing by their side. And so, really thinking about the best way to deliver justice and meet the needs of people is really the key reason why in our strategic plan, we're really focused on using any sort of innovative technology, AI obviously being one of those, to try to help people as best we can. And I gave the example of court help. You can go on court help and all the content is based upon what's on our website or on the Judicial Council of California's website. But of course, it's hard to find. So you can go on Court Help right now and say, how do I file a response or an answer to an eviction case? And it gives you step by step and links to it. That's what we should be doing. And AI has given us the opportunity to do that.
Everything you said resonates with me as somebody who led a court system for a while. And I have a slide of a surgical suite from 1890 and a modern surgical suite, and then a court, the Iron County Courthouse in Michigan from 1890 and today, and it looks exactly the same. And a lawyer dropped from 1890 really could navigate today's courtrooms. And I agree with you. I mean, I'm not sure why that's something we should be proud of. It seems to me, since we've gone through 4 industrial revolutions, like we might think about how we need to sort of change how we do what we do. But you've been incredibly successful at that at lots of different levels, and also in helping others be successful at that in some of your roles. Um, and in addition to some of the barriers that are kind of cultural and legal and regulatory to transformation, there's just a big change management um, hill to climb, I think, in providing court services to a largely unrepresented user base. And when lawyers and judges have done things one way for a long time, that can be a really hard part of the equation. What have you learned about change management in our profession that values, sort of how we've always done things? We're literally governed legally by decisions we made before. Like that's what precedent is. So it's a very hard change management atmosphere. How have you succeeded? I mean, you've definitely succeeded in ways I don't see other examples of. So what's your change management secret playbook?
Yeah, I think it's you point out the always looking back, sort of the looking at precedent, and I think that is a challenge for us. And so, and people don't like change. No one wakes up in the morning and says, well, maybe a few of us do, but most people don't wake up in the morning and say, I want to change something today. They're just like move my cheese today. But so I think you have to, start with making the case for change. Why? What's the reason? Change for change is not going to be successful, and so diagnosing problems is important. Being able to describe them clearly. I think a lot of times we say, "Let's make this change," and no one understands why we're doing it. So that's to me number one is really trying to lay that out clearly. Where in essence, no one can really say no because you've made the case, and unless they just want to say no just to say no, they're going to say, oh yeah, this makes sense. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is and this is a real problem for us that I think we have to keep working on is just we do not allow for failure. And obviously, when we're deciding cases, we don't want to be making mistakes. There is an appellate process for that if we do. But so I think that sometimes spills over into our administrative functions. Let's not make any mistakes. And we know what happens with that, which is no one will ever do anything because they're terrified. So making sure people in our organizations understand that we can try things. Obviously, we want to fail fast and we don't want to fail big. We want to, we want to try to make sure failure is managed, but we're going to fail. I've failed many times in my career with things, but the goal is to fail fast. And then the biggest question is, how do we get up? What do we do next? How do we learn from that failure and move on? And I think that's a real key to success. I mean, some of the sort of simple things of, you know, if you're just pilot it, give it a shot at in a smaller scale and see if it works, see what doesn't work, and try to figure out how to make that happen. I think all those things are really key. Probably at the bottom line, I wrote an article with Chief Justice Nathan Hack a few years ago about sort of change and how to deal with it. And sometimes it feels like you're just staring down the gauntlet. And one of the things we wrote about is sometimes you just have to do it. You have to just make a decision and move. You have to say we're going to do this change because it's the right thing to do. And with the best information you have, make that decision. We talk about in that article that sometimes you don't have all the information. Actually, most of the time you don't have all the information, so you just have to make the decision. And I think sometimes the fear of just doing anything stops us from doing anything. And so, really, just having the courage to step up and say, "This is an important change. We're going to try it. We might not be successful, but staying with what we're doing and have been doing is even less successful." So I think those are some things that I really try to ground myself in and try to share with people I'm around to try to move things forward.
I feel like you're like peering into my soul. I mean, just gave this keynote about change management, and I said, action leads to information. That's my view is you have to sometimes just have to do things to learn. Um, and you might learn that that thing doesn't make any sense to do anymore. But action leads to information. And on my team, I often say, let's run the experiment. Like somebody has an idea, somebody else says it'll never work. And my answer is always, let's run the experiment, find out. But how do you convince others of that, I now work with a lot of people who are not lawyers, and that's refreshing, I have to say. um, how do you convince others like to go along the 500 plus judicial officers and lawyers who work with you?
Yeah, I think the first thing, sort of back to one thing, is you gotta explain the why. People have to grasp the why. They have to understand why. If we try to do it before that, it's not going to work. And then I think, I mean, this is not going to help people who are just starting off doing change, but you have a track record, right? I mean, you've been successful maybe in little things, maybe in big things, and you gain trust. So I think, again, that requires action, to your point earlier. Maybe you try something. Let's say you're new at this. You're a new court administrator. You're, new in this function. You got to do something to sort of build trust. And then when you're successful, and or you fail but you're able to pivot and make it successful, then you get some trust, and then you gain a little bit more, and you gain a little more, and then ultimately you say, we want to do this giant thing, and here's why. And people say, sign me up, let's go. Which is kind of interesting to watch. You know, I've done in my career, been able to do sort of crazy things that I look back and think, I'm so excited to have been a part of those things. And I think that helps me when I say, we're going to do this thing, and people come along. And now, if I would have been new in my career and started that, would I have been able to convince people? I don't know. But I think, again, it sort of goes back to that. For somebody that's kind of new at this, you got to start. Otherwise, you're never going to gain that credibility that's so important whenever you're talking about change.
David, talking as you were at the beginning about the high percentage of self-represented litigants trying to navigate the system and the potential AI has to start putting power into people's hands to self-navigate or navigate with tools that the court creates for them. There's been a lot of conversation about both the power that the tools create, but also are there risks involved in sort of democratizing access to the tools? We all know on this Zoom that lawyers have always sort of had the control of designing the systems, even though the outcomes are that most people are navigating the systems without lawyers at their side, as you said. So, how are you thinking through creating frameworks for harnessing the power of AI while minimizing the risks to people who are using AI to self navigate the systems?
Well, let's start with one thing which I keep saying, and I know Bridget and I had lots of conversations about this about 5 years ago, which is that our system that exists today is not without risk, and it causes many harms. When we were going through the pandemic, I remember Bridget and I having conversations with people about, well, what if the this happens, because we're doing something remote, and we were like, hang on, that happens today in the physical world. Like we're not creating a utopia. So we have to understand that there are risks and harms that come with the system that we've had. So a system without AI, a system without that has failures and risk as well that are significant. So I just want to sort of set that aside for a second. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing everything we can to reduce those risks and harms. And we know that AI can bring those into to bear if we're not careful. So I'll just give you an example of something we're looking at. I mentioned court help on our website. We did a couple things. One is we trained that tool to only use content from our website or from the Judicial Council of California. Obviously, we don't want it going out and searching the World Wide Web and providing answers. It would provide answers that we don't really control. And then we're sort of fine tuning that tool to tell it sort of how creative to be. It's obviously trying to think about the ways that we use AI. And I don't want people to be scared of AI because I think courts need to be embracing it more. But I think at the same time, you've got to be careful. You've got to think about the way that you're using those tools, what content you're allowing it to rely on, and those type of things. And then I think, I mean, one of the criticisms of these automated tools is, the bias and things it brings in. I think you've got to think about what's the content and the information it's using to provide information to litigants. So and I think at the end of the day, go on court help and look for yourself. We put a disclaimer on there. This might not be right, but guess what? The clerk in the self help center probably doesn't get it right 100% of the time either. So I think we don't give those disclaimers. But bottom line is we've got to think about ways and keep getting feedback. So again, I keep bringing this up, but on court help we have a thumbs up, thumbs down. If the answer it gives you is a bad answer, and hopefully people will give us a thumbs down, and then we take that information as a feedback loop and we try to make improvements to the system. That's sort of, I think, the path forward on this. I don't think we should go into this not with eyes wide open that there are risks. I do hope we remember that there's a risk to doing nothing as well, which are the ones that have existed for decades, if not centuries.
It also sounds like to me, David, if I could ask a follow-up question. I've had conversations with friends and colleagues who work as public interest lawyers and legal aid organizations, and sometimes the question is posed as a binary choice, that it's either somebody who is represented by a legal aid attorney with when the stakes are the highest and they're in a trial situation or a hearing in front of a judge, and it's either they're represented by a lawyer or they're represented by a robot. And, why would you want a world in which that's the outcome? And it sounds to I would not want that world to to be the outcome. But to me, there are millions, like literally millions of different gradations between that situation and what you're describing, which is making websites and making information more usable, more accessible. So maybe just curious about your thoughts about thinking through different ways to select uses that are low risk and identifying those and rolling out opportunities to test and get feedback from self-represented litigants there versus the more high stakes situations where we would want to focus lawyer time and attention and the promise of AI to help us move lawyers more in that direction. Is that how you think about AI?
Yeah, that's a great description the way you've laid it out, which is, I sort of see AI as a tool, and it's not a replacement. It's a tool, and think about it from the perspective of a self-represented litigant, um, and maybe even think about it from a triage perspective. Maybe level one is an AI tool that helps provide them information to move them along the path, and maybe that's enough for X percent. Maybe it's even a large percent. And then there are those that are going to need additional help, and we want to be able to almost we want to use the AI to point them to, okay, now you need to go to the self help center, or you need to call the self help center, because you this is not going to help you. But the problem is, of course, we don't have unlimited funds and unlimited staff, and so the we want to be using our tools just like with legal aid. We want to be using the resources we have to help the most people, and I think of AI as a tool that's sort of a force multiplier. It gives us more opportunity to help more people. But at the end of the day, we're gonna be there. We're gonna have the self help staff there. Lawyers are gonna be there to really try to guide people in a way that's more helpful. It's really interesting. I started when I was at the court. We started our project with the Stanford Law School, and my original question for them was, why are all these people standing outside the self help center every morning? Because um, they can do everything that they're doing here online. And coming to downtown LA to one of our self help centers is no easy task. Parking, traffic, all the things there that go with that. And, so my original question slash hypothesis to them was, can't we get these people to appear remotely using the technology we have for them? And, they did focus groups, they did all this research, and they came back to me a couple months later and said, the reason why they're coming in person, because this is the most important thing that's happening in their lives. And they're terrified they'll get it wrong. And they just want someone to say, yeah, that's the right form. Yes, that's what you put there in that blank. So sometimes that human touch is so important, especially in situations where people have so much at risk. And I think we can't forget that. Technology is a tool that can help people, move people along the path, give them information that at least reduces their anxiety and frustration. But we've got to have the people there to assist when really those needs rise above what we can provide to them through technology.
So interesting. I mean, in a way, it's only by again, like starting to put the technology into people's hands, or into your users' lives, that you find what those better use cases are, and then use cases that might surprise you where they want to like park and drive and talk to a person. And you only know that by, again, like taking steps in a particular direction. So I think a very clear picture of your change management leadership, and this is why, like, you're as successful as you are, is emerging. And you flagged this HBR article about the CEO at Moody's, sort of diving into generative AI, which is sort of a surprising institution for to do that. And I think I now know why you flagged it, but I'd rather hear it from you. Like, what resonated with you about that story, and what can we learn from it?
Yeah, so obviously Moody's a over century old institution, sort of financial industry, so very risk averse to try, doing things that are out there. Reputation super important. Sounds kind of familiar. Sounds like the types of institutions we work in. And so, when I was reading this article, I just found it fascinating because one of the challenges I think we face when we're talking about court staff and judicial officers is fear of the unknown, fear of AI, and not understanding how this might be a tool that would help us in our daily work, but also help those that we serve. And one of the things that I found, and also, if in that article, the Moody's CEO basically said, we don't have a choice but to really embrace this because if we don't, we're going to be left behind. We're not going to be able to serve our clients, bottom line is will not exist. And I think again, that's a challenge for us. This is not something like some courts still don't have electronic filing because they chose not to have electronic filing. I don't think we're in that situation with AI. We don't really have a choice. It's coming to us and our staff and our judges are using it whether we know it or not. And so I think it's sort of how do we embrace this in a way that's effective? So, one of the things that I thought that was really fascinating that the Moody CEO did with all that information was to say, one, we need to make sure everyone in our organization understands AI, how it can be used, have a basic level of understanding amongst everyone in the organization. And then we want to give them tools to be able to innovate with AI. And we want innovation to be driven from the ground up. And I just found that to be really fascinating. I think if I sit in my office as a CEO and say, you all need to use AI to do X, Y, and Z, the resistance is going to be tremendous because people don't understand it. They're scared of it. They don't understand how it might be helpful to them. So the goal here is to sort of flip, for me at least, what Moody's did is what we're looking to do is sort of flip this upside down and to say, let's give everybody the tools they need to have a better understanding of it. Let's give them actual tools that they can use safely and effectively in their functions every day. And then let's let them just sort of basically almost be demanding from us, give me AI to solve this problem and that problem and this problem. That changes the way this looks. I mean, I work in an organization where most of our employees are represented by labor. We don't want labor pushing it, fighting against us saying, oh, this is going to eliminate jobs or whatever. That's not the message. The message, this is a tool that can really help employees with the work that they're already doing. And we want them to be demanding it from us versus us trying to push it down on them and them resisting it. And I found that Moody's article, the HBR article, to be really instructive to me as something that I could take and do in my own organization. And we're on the cusp of doing that.
Couldn't agree more. Like that, so many different things you said. The market will show no loyalty to our traditional ways of working. It won't. It's not going to care. And for a general purpose technology, Jen and I do a lot of presentations on this, and a general purpose technology is just going to be throughout our lives. It's not like some tech upgrade that you can decide not to put in place, right? You can say like we the LA court system are not going to put, we're not going to put our data in the cloud. We've decided that's too dangerous. We're not going to do that. So you're going to have to keep filing, and we're going to have everything on prem. Um, this is this is going to be throughout our lives, and that's the thing with general purpose technologies, right? You don't fully understand all the ways it's going to impact you, but by giving all of your teams access and encouragement, they'll be the ones to figure out where it can have an impact on the workflows that that are the most tedious, and also just the ones that can easily be automated. And probably some of them in particular jobs will know that better than you will, right? You don't do that job in that clerk, that assistant clerk's like docket. Yep. And then they'll be the ones to help you figure out like where are the ways it's going to make a difference in our operations and where are the ways it's going to make a difference in our core services. It's you're like running the playbook that Ethan Mollick calls leadership lab crowd. It's coming from the top so that it can come from the bottom, and everybody is in. The entire crowd has to be involved. And that's how you probably will identify your lab, those folks who will become super users and help you figure out the roadmap. I feel like you have to update that article you wrote with Chief Justice Hecht. There's like a new chapter.
It's also making me think, Bridget, of our last podcast with the MIT report on the failed pilots. Our team works with firms on pilots. Bridget's team runs pilots for specific purposes. But David, what you're describing and what the Moody's article describes aligns, I think, with what that report finds, which we talked about as not being that surprising. And to just reflect Bridget's comments, everybody's sort of playing around with this in their own individual space and figuring out what it means for them. And the sort of takeaway in the media of that report was like, this is all hype and it's not really something worth investing in. Where what at least I took from it is the contrary is that everybody's playing with it in their own space, and it's not yet ready in most cases for highly structured, sort of measured ROI because everybody just has to learn to build a muscle around it. And then, as Bridget's saying, it starts surfacing use cases and really strong ways to put structure around it where you can organize real, impactful, as you said at the beginning, David, ways to be effective as an organization that serves your community. Maybe we can move on. We have a sort of two sides of the coin question for you, David. If LA courts were to move too slowly on AI, what do you think the biggest risk would be?
Yeah, one of the things that draws this out, I think, as an example, we are seeing tremendous increases in unlimited civil case filings. This would be civil case filings with where the amount in controversy is over $35,000, mostly driven by personal injury auto cases, some debt cases, and lemon law cases. Um, and there's a hypothesis out there that the National Center for State Courts wrote on recently using our data and a couple other states' data that looks very similar to ours, which is that AI developed pleadings are driving some of this. It's getting easier for lawyers to use AI to file documents. And so new cases are coming in fast. Quite frankly, we're not getting additional resources to deal with those. So how do we deal with that? And you know, so it's sort of like either we choose to use AI to help us in processing all these documents that are coming in and dealing with the cases, or we say we're gonna keep doing it our old fashioned way because we're not embracing AI, and we'll just get run over. That's my feeling. And there's not a court in this country. I keep asking every time I speak to courts. Are you overfunded? Do you have too much staff? And do you have, plenty of staff to cover all the work? The answer is no. No one has enough staff, enough judicial officers, really. And so, at the end of the day, I think this, embracing AI allows us to deal with those things that we've struggled with for decades, which is we just don't have enough staff to do it and to do it well and to really serve the public as well as we can. Part of the frustration from litigants is the courts are too slow, too costly, and too unpredictable. Well, AI helps us with some of that. It helps us certainly with the too slow basis because we can use it to help expedite some of our things, maybe therefore reducing the cost. So all of a sudden we begin to see benefits to the litigants. And, if we choose not to embrace that, then again, I think we lose trust from the public. They lose confidence in us. And, quite frankly, they walk away and we can't afford that. Our democracy needs a strong and effective judicial system, and this is a tool that helps us get there.
And on the flip side, if the court system moves too quickly, what's the biggest risk?
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about the risks earlier. If we move too quickly, then we again lose trust. Alexander Hamilton said the judiciary has neither the power of the purse nor the power of the sword, only the people's trust and confidence in the system. And so we can't lose that. So if it becomes where people say, "Oh, the judges aren't really making decisions; they're using AI," or we're using AI in ways that bake in bias that cause people lose trust, those are huge risks. And so I think making sure that we are purposefully pursuing AI in ways that help us solve problems. Again, not just pursuing AI to pursue AI, but to solve problems, but also keeping in mind the risks that come with that and the things that we need to do to protect against those issues. We sort of are able to get there. But if we move too fast, we, ultimately lose trust probably faster than doing nothing. So it's a delicate balance, I think, between those two things.
It's hard, I think, for any of us to sort of predict the future. I mean, it's, when the movie camera was invented, all people used it for was recording plays. It took a while to figure out that it could actually add effects and they could, edit, and like an entirely new art form was born. But we had to first just kind of automate what we did before to open up room to see what else we could build. And I think AI is going to be like that for all of us in so many parts of our lives, but certainly across the legal profession. Even so, can you do any predicting about where you see it headed? Or is there a future where parties that have work to be done in the LA County Court might end up interacting with AI more than with human clerks or even human judges? Would that be okay? Should it be okay? Like, do you have any views on that?
This is a difficult question, as you point out. It's hard to predict the future, but I have some thoughts on this, and I think it's going to be the question will be how comfortable are people are accepting things. But one of the things that we're having conversations about are the time it takes and the cost in getting through the court system. And I think we could use AI and all the data set of cases we have to provide some predictive analytics to people to let them know what a typical outcome might look like. And maybe people would choose to take that path, sort of like the express lane path. That they would maybe choose to do that because they want to get a resolution, they want to get a judgment. Always having the option, I think, to go to the full major traffic jam, congested 5 lanes of traffic type model. But I could see an environment where you might choose to do that. I mean, we do that in our lives in other ways. I mean, we've talked, and I know AAA is working on this in lots of ways. Which online dispute resolution is a common thing in other areas. If I have a problem with Amazon, I don't go through some exhaustive process writing them a letter to tell them to fix my problem. I just resolve the problem in about 30 seconds. And so I think as that becomes more and more common, people don't know they're dealing with AI in that situation, but they are. And as that becomes more and more common and we can get tools that are that effective, I think people might choose to do that more often. Again, I think there's going to be cases where people are going to say, "I don't want any of that. I want to go the old fashioned way, the way we've done it for centuries," and that's fine. But I love the thought of giving people choices. It's the same way we've done with remote technology. You can come in person or you can appear remotely. Make your choice. And I would really love to see us be able to give people choices similar to that as far as adjudication of their cases. As far as filing documents in clerk's offices, we're already seeing some of that. Obviously, electronic filing. Really, no one's coming into a clerk's office if they're an attorney anymore. They're all electronically filing their documents. But now we're beginning, even at our court right now, to use AI and robotics processing and other things to process documents. We picked 20 of the lowest sort of hanging fruit documents in our court to do that. Use AI and robotics processing to process those, and it represents 1 million documents filed per year. Tremendously helpful to make our staff not feel so overwhelmed with the queues of documents that are coming in, and allow them to spend more time on the ones that take more of their brain power to process. So, in essence, lawyers are interacting more with technology, even though they may not know it, because we're using that automated processes to do some of that processing on the back end.
I love the idea of giving parties the opportunity to choose their own adventure. I often describe it the same way, that there be, and it's not just like the value of the dispute. Sometimes disputes where parties have to maintain a relationship when the dispute is over, they might prefer a human led process. But definitely there are going to be others, repetitive disputes, where they might want a more automated AI native process, and the ability to give them you know, the tools to fit the form to the fuss, is a really exciting sort of next step in great service in courts, and it's no surprise that you're at the forefront of it.
That's an amazing number of documents that you've been able to leverage AI to handle, David. And I can see why you're so excited about your work. But as you noted, it's also a tremendous amount of work to undertake the type of change that you are. So, what's keeping you most energized as we sort of reach the end of our conversation with you about your work right now?
I think one of the things that keeps me energized is the opportunity to make our system better. I've worked as Chief Justice McCormack said at the beginning. I've been working in this profession for over 25 years. It's basically all I've ever done as an adult, is work in the court system, and I love it. I describe myself on Twitter as a designated court nerd. But at the end of the day, we can do so much better. And the really exciting thing for me right now is the fact that while technology is not everything, the opportunity to use the tools that are now available to us, whether it be the shift we made to remote technology. I mean, we wouldn't have done that without the pandemic, but what an amazing thing on the back end because it's improved people's ability to access justice. We have the same opportunity now in the right situations and employing those tools appropriately to use AI to drastically expand people's ability to access justice in really meaningful ways. You know, that's been inscribed on the Supreme Court building for a long time, equal access to justice under the law. But we've not been able to really provide that, I don't think, in ways that are really meaningful. And yet now we're able to do that. We're really beginning to use technology to say it doesn't matter whether you have a lawyer or not. It doesn't matter whether you have money or not. It doesn't matter whether or not you can get to court or not, or you have previous knowledge. We're going to give you tools that allow you to access the justice system in meaningful ways. You may lose, even with all that information, and we're not saying we want to make people win or lose. We want to give them information, but we want them to be able to do it in a way that they feel empowered to actually access the system and feel like they got that true access. And I think for me, that's really exciting. And I think the opportunities ahead of us in the next couple of years are tremendous. And technology is getting faster and faster. So as we think about embracing these things, re-looking at our processes to make things work better, to me, that's the most exciting thing that keeps me going every day.
The people of LA County are lucky to have you there. And I'm going to be really excited to follow everything you do. Thanks so much for joining us today. This was a really, really fun conversation, like I knew it would be.
Thank you for having me. I loved it.
Thank you so much, David, for joining us. It was such an inspiring conversation. And as Bridget said, LA County is so lucky to have you. And thanks to everybody out there who joined this conversation. I know I learned so much, and I know everybody out there learned so much as well. We look forward to seeing you next time on the next edition of AI and the Future of Law. Until then, be well.